Welcome back. In this lecture and the next one, we're going to build the header part of the app. And that will include using SVG images as icons instead of an icon font. So you're going to learn what SVGs actually are, how to find, generate, and use SVG sprites in HTML, how to change the color of an SVG image in CSS, and finally, you will learn some more advanced Flexbox alignment techniques, which we're going to need to lay out all the components in the header. So in our header, we basically have three main components. We have the logo here, okay? Then we have this search bar with this input field here and this icon. And then on the right side, we have something that I call the user navigation. So we have like bookmarks, a chat functionality, and the name of the user. Okay, so these three are the main components: logo, search bar, and user navigation. So let's mark that up in our HTML right now. So, header. And we start with the image, which I simply call logo. And the source for this one is in the IMG folder and simply called logo. And as a description, I just use Trillo logo. All right, so that's the first part. Next, we have a search bar, and for that, I'm using a form element, okay? And the action is just the hash symbol, so nothing happens, okay? Now in here, we want an input, which is called search input. And as you see, once again, I'm using the BEM notation here, okay? So search is my block, and then the element is the input separated with these two underscores. Okay. Now we also have the placeholder here, which says search hotels. Okay, and then the button. And you can guess this one is called search button. Now remember that in here, in the button, we actually had this little icon, this magnifying glass. So this icon here, right? So in the last Natures project that we built, and maybe in your projects that you've built for yourself, we've been using icon fonts, right? But this time we're going to do it differently, and we're going to use SVGs as icons, okay? Now, why are we actually moving away from icon fonts to SVGs? Well, there are several problems with icon fonts, like the fact that it's really just a hack to display icons, which are like images using a font. Also, icon fonts fail more often than you would think, and in that case, the browser just displays a black square or something like that on the screen. And that's really terrible. And there are actually other issues, like screen readers for blind people trying to read out the icon fonts and of course failing to do so. Alright, and because of all that, right now it's actually considered a best practice to move away from icon fonts and to move to a better alternative. And that better alternative is of course SVG. Now what is SVG actually? Well, SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics, and it's just basically a way of writing vector graphics with code. But don't worry, we're not going to write any SVG code here for icons, okay? Instead, we're going to use a great app called iCoMoon. And so let's open that one, iCoMoon.io. And so it's just really a simple web app, okay? So let's move here to here where it says iCoMoon app. So here in the iCoMoon app, you can upload an icon font if you want, for example here. So if you have an icon font on your computer and want to convert it to SVGs, then you can do it in here, okay? But what's even better is that we can just select some icons from their free library, okay? So let's do that. So if you come down here, you have add icons from the library. Then you have all of these free libraries with these free icons. Okay, so you can take a look at all of these. And the ones that I'm choosing are called In Typo. Okay, so In Typo Plus, because I really like these and I think they look great on our app. So we just hit add. And then from here, all we have to do is to select the icons that we actually want. Okay, and if we take a look at this finished app, we see that we actually need 10 icons. So these 4 icons here, then a star, then this bookmark, this chat, this location pin, this list item icon here, and then finally, of course, the magnifying glass, which is the one we're going to use next. Okay, so these 10 icons is the one that we need to select. And so here is one, here is the next one, then here is the plane, here is the chat. Down here we have the house and also the key down here. Let's see, add the location. Then here the magnifying glass, the map, and finally the star down here. Okay, so we have our 10 icons selected. You can see it here, we have 10, okay? Now if you wanted other icons or more icons, you could of course select as many as you wished, okay? So all we have to do now is to come here, generate SVG and more, and then we see our 10 icons that we selected. Then we hit here the settings, okay? So we see that there will be a class prefix called icon, and we don't want any PNGs, we just want SVGs, okay? So it says SVG here now, and now we can hit download and open it up. So when you open this folder, it gives you all this stuff here, which you really don't use, okay? So all we need are these SVG files here, and even more importantly, this file here, so symbol devs, and this is a so-called sprite file. So what is a sprite file? Well, it's simply an SVG file which contains all of these 10 SVG images in it. Okay, and so that's the one that we're actually going to use, because this way we only have to use one global file, which is this one here, and from there we can select each of the icons. And so this way we only have one HTTP request for one file, instead of having to include all of these 10 different files. So icon sprites like this one here is the way to go, and that's how all professionals do it, okay? Also we have this HTML file here, which is just so that we can see the names of the icons. And actually this is not the right one. The one that we need is just demo. So these are the names of the icons that we can then use in HTML. So first let's get our icons here. So this entire folder and then this one here, and I'm going to copy it to the project folder. So Trillo, IMG, and then I'm pasting it in here. All right, here we go. Now I'm going to call this one sprite, and actually I already have one sprite because I included it here because I already had it, okay? So I'm going to delete it and call this one sprite. So you should also delete the sprite file that you already had and then change this one here to sprite. And so that's the one that we're going to use. I'm also leaving this folder here with these initial files because we're going to need maybe one of them later, okay? So, and with this, we are ready to use this sprite SVG file. So let's go back to our code editor here and include it. Now, how do we actually do that in HTML? Well, we use the SVG element, which I'm going to call search icon. And then in here, we have to use something called use, okay? So use, and then an attribute called xlink : href. So that sounds a bit strange, but that's just how we can include the SVG file and then reference each separate icon in there. Okay, so img sprite.svg, and that's the name of the sprite file. And now from here we have to select the icon that we want. So let's see how it's called. And it's called icon magnifying glass. Let's copy that. And now we use hash and then the name of the icon. And that's actually it. So closing it, and here we go. So this is really the best way to include SVGs in HTML using a SVG sprite like we did. And that's because this way we can actually change the color of each of the icons using CSS. And I'm going to show you how in a little bit. Okay? Now another thing that I need to tell you is that using SVGs like this with the xlink href attribute is only going to work on a web server. So only on a web server you will be able to see this sprite SVG file. But since we're doing that, actually, okay, we are using a web server, which is this local one here. So this localhost server, and that's why it actually works. And so here is our SVG icon, right? So everything works perfectly, and we're now ready to start using SVGs in our HTML. And that's a great step. Now this is of course not formatted here at all, but we're going to take care of that later. And another advantage actually of SVG is that it makes it really easy to format these icons. With icon font, it was always really hard to put them exactly the way we wanted, but with SVGs, that problem is gone, and it's actually super easy. Okay, and now finally, the user navigation. So we're using the nav HTML5 element here for the navigation. And then in here, I'm going to put 3 boxes. So let me show that to you. So 1 box for each of these. This box, and this box. Okay, so let's do that. So user nav, the name of the block, nav icon, and then in here our SVG. Now actually this is not the name that I wanted here. Let me change that. So icon box. So now it's okay. So this is a box where the icon will sit. And this one is the user nav icon. And now let's use the use again. So xlink href and img sprite. And this time let's check it out. We will want to use the, here it is. Let's close the icon moon. So we want the one called icon bookmark, and then next the one called icon chat. So icon bookmark, and next time the icon chat. Let's actually copy that already. Okay, so icon chat. Give it some space here. All right. And actually, we also want like this notification indicator here, right? So this small notification circle here, okay? So that's just a span element, which I'm calling user nav notification. And here let's put a 7, and then in the other one, let's put 13. Okay, and now the next box, user nav, and this one I'm calling simply the user. So if you have an image here, as you remember, and this one is called, I think it's the one just called user, and that's actually a picture of myself. So user photo, and then just a span for the name. So user nav, username, and then my name in here. And that is our HTML markup for the header. So let's check it out now. And that's of course terrible at this point. So let's try to do some quick formatting here, especially of the images and icons, which are now like really huge. Okay, so we should fix that. So let's now open our components file here, because from now on, I'm going to write all the code for all these smaller components right here into this file. Now this stuff that we're going to put here, these are not really components in the meaning that I gave them in the last project. So they're not necessarily really reusable across projects, but I'm still calling them simply components here, because that's the easiest way to do it here right now. Okay, so this one is simply called logo. And what I want here is a height of 3.25 rem. Okay, so remember once again that this project is not really about CSS architecture and all that stuff that I showed you in the last project, because these are really important. But in this project, I just want to focus on Flexbox and on building this app. All right, so that is the logo. And let me actually put a comment here on each of these so-called components. So just a line of these slashes here to separate them. And then I simply say logo. Okay. And now I do the same thing for the search box. And down here the same thing for the user nav. So search, and in here we have the input. And of course it's 2 underscores. And the button. of course. Let's see if we have something else here. So we have input, button, oh, and here is icon as well. So, all right, icon. And now for the user navigation, let's also put these selectors here already. So user nav, and here we have the icon box. And let's see what else we have. So icon box, then we have icon here, notification, user photo, and username. So there's a lot of stuff to select here. So icon box, icon, we have the notification, the user photo, and finally the user name. So that's a lot to format here. But what I want to start with for now is these huge parts, okay? So we already gave the icon here a smaller size, but we want to do the same with this magnifying glass and with these two icons, and of course with this user image here, okay? So let's do that right now. So let's start with the search icon here. Now, how do we actually format an SVG icon? Well, it's really easy compared to icon fonts. All we have to do is to set its height and its width in order to size it the way we want. So let's set to RAM for both the height and the width. Check it out. And here we go. And now it's really small. And now here for the user nav icons as well. And these here should be slightly bigger. So I'm putting 2.25 rem for both the height and the width. 2.25 rem. And now finally, the user photo. Let's give it a height of 3.75 rem. Okay? And since we're at it, I'll also make it a round, so border radius of 50%. And then let's see how it looks like right now. That looks better, but still far from perfect. So in the next lecture, we're going to take care of actually aligning all of these items properly, using, of course, Flexbox, and then to style everything so that it looks great, just like this here. Okay? So that's what we're going to take care in the next lecture. This is part 2 of building the app's header section. So to start this lecture, let's actually put these 3 elements that we have here in the header side by side. And how do we do that? Well, you guessed it, we're going to use Flexbox. So what should be the Flex container here in this case? Well, it should simply be the parent element of the elements that we want side by side. And that's these 3 here. So the logo, the search bar, and the user navigation, right? And so the parent of these is the header element. So here we go. Yeah, so in the header. So all we have to do is to set display to flex, and that will put them side by side. All right, now let's give them actually some background color so that we can see what's going on here. So the search, I'm going to use my orange-red favorite here again. And then on this one here, we can use like green, yellow. All right, check it out. So, here we go. Now, how do we want these to be aligned? We want this green one here, so the user navigation, all the way to the right side, right? And then this one here in the middle. And what is the Flexbox property that allows us to do that? I hope that you printed your cheat sheet so that you can take a look at it and find out which property we have to use. Okay? And in case you don't know, we need to use justify content. And of course, that one is again on the Flex container, not on the Flex items. Okay? So justify content will align the elements along the main axis. And that's the one we're talking about here, right? So what are the possible values here? For example, we could use center just to show it to you. And that's what that would do. So it would simply center all of these elements side by side here in the center of the Flex container. But that's also not what we want, because what we really want is space between. Okay, and so it will basically divide the empty space between these three elements. And that's what that looks like, and it's perfect. That's exactly what we want. We could also do like space around. Let me show that to you as well. It would result in this one, but that puts way too much space here on the left side of this one and here on the right side. So we don't want that. We only want a little space, and so we're going to do that later with margins. But for now, in here, let's do space between. And I think that this one is actually the most useful one of all. All right. So that is alignment along the main axis, so from left to right. But we also want to align these items along the cross axis, right? So basically here from top to bottom. So that, for example, we can have this image here nicely centered vertically in the header. So if we didn't have Flexbox, we could now use like margin top and would then have to experiment which is the perfect margin. But Flexbox makes our lives so much easier, and all we have to do is to use the align items property, right? So remember that one? So align items and simply set it to center. And that's what it will produce. So this one is now nicely centered vertically, so along the cross axis, and so is this one and this one. This one is of course overlapping it because there's too much content in it, but still it is now centered. So you saw that before it was set to stretch, and that's why this element here was occupying the entire space, so everything here was orange, right? But now we set it to center, and so it's vertically centered now. So that is align items. So all we have to really do now is to just format these elements here, okay? So let's start with our logo and simply give it some margin to the left side of 3 rem, okay? And so now that's perfect, so really nicely positioned here. So starting here with the search element, let's first give it some width, okay? And since it's a flex item, let's do that using the flex property. So flex, we don't want it to grow to fill all its available space, okay? We also don't want it to shrink, and we want it to occupy 40% of the header, okay? Now as for the input element, this is how we want it to look like, okay? So it's this gray rounded element here with this gray icon here at the end, okay? So let's now do that. And so we start with the font family, which on an input element doesn't inherit the font family of the global document. And so we have to automatically set it to inherit here. And the same thing for the font size, actually. So let's set it to inherit here as well. And then we want the background color. And again, we're going to use our variables here. And the one that we want right now is this gray color here, okay? So light gray 2. We want it to have no border. We also want the text color to be inherited. Okay, so we set all of these here in the same place. Well, what else can we do? We can set some padding. So 0.7 rem on the top and bottom, and 2 rem on the left and on the right side. So 20 pixels. Now we also can set that border radius to a really high number. Doesn't matter. You can even set it in pixels. It doesn't really matter. Just a high number so that it has these rounded edges. And okay, let's take a look actually. And that's what it looks like. Well, still not perfect, but we're kind of getting there. We have to actually give it a width here. Okay. And we're not doing 100% because we want this to happen when we click it. You saw that? So it expanded when it received the focus. And when we click outside, it goes back to the original size. So let's set it to like 90%. Okay, and then we can also change what we want to happen when we focus the element. So focus, we don't want that outline, okay? But instead what we want to happen is that the width should be set to 100%. So that was the effect that we saw earlier. So when the input element becomes focused, it increases from 90% to 100% of its available width, which is this 40% here of the parent element. And we also want it to become a little bit darker, which is basically the same thing as this, but the light number 3. So that's a bit darker. And for the animation here, transition all in 0.2 seconds. So let's take a look at that now. And that's much better. So when we click it, it increases to 100%. Great. Well, it's still not perfect, but for now, let's continue with styling this button here now, okay? So here we are, the button. So first, we don't want any border on it. And then we want it to have the same background color as the input, because we basically want it to be like on top of the input, right? And actually, in order for that to happen, we should give the input here some negative margin on the right side. So margin right, and then like minus 3.5 rem. And so this way, the button will move on top of the input. Okay, now let's also just remove the focus here from this one. So outline none, but what happens instead is that basically when we click the button, we just want it to move a bit down. So transform, translate Y, and then let's just say 2 pixels. All right, let's take a look now. And that's much better. So now it's actually on top of the search bar. And when we click this, we see this nice animation going on. Now what's left to do here is to actually center this icon here vertically as well as horizontally, right? Because when the input field is not active, we want it to be at the center of this element here, right? So of the parent element. So how do we do that? Well, the best solution is once again to use Flexbox. And so you see each time we want to center something or to align something, we can always use Flexbox. So Flexbox is perfect for all of these small situations where we need to align or center some elements. So what should actually be the flex container of these elements? Well, of course, it's the search element, right? And so now, for the first time, we're doing something that we didn't do before, which is that a flex item is becoming a flex container. And that is perfectly possible. So we now have nested Flexbox. Okay? So again, let's take a look. And it's already centered, you see, because align items is set to stretch. So align items, let's move it from stretch to center, and then justify content also to center. So again, align items to center centers the elements along the cross axis, and justify content center centers the elements along the main axis. So let's check that out. And yep, that is exactly what we wanted, right? So now I hit this, and now it grows to the sides. So that's perfect. Now this margin here is not perfect here actually, but that's because of the negative margin that I gave it here on the other side, which is actually a bit too much. So it was here. And actually another thing that we have to do is to set the background color of the button to the same color of this focused here when the input is focused, right? So right now, if you look closely, you will see that if the input is selected, the background color here of this icon is slightly lighter, okay? So let's fix that. And we have to actually do it outside here. So input, focus, and then select the adjacent search button, right? So we did that a lot of time in the other project. So just to remember, here we have the input and here we have the button, and they are siblings, okay? And so therefore we can use the adjacent selector to select the sibling of the selected input, okay? So here in the components, and now what we want to happen is that the button becomes the same background color as the input, okay? And so now it should be perfect. All right, now one last thing is the color of this magnifying glass. Remember that I told you that with the way that we included the SVG sprite in the HTML, we could change the SVG color right in CSS, right? So let me now show you how we can do that. And it's actually very easy. all we have to do is to use the fill property. So fill, and that's it. And now we can specify our color. And the one that I want is this dark gray here, the number 3. And that's actually it. Let's just remove here this background color. And then this component will be completely ready. Okay, let's just compare it to this one. Well, this is actually a bit different because the text is bigger here and lighter. And so we should change that as well. So basically the placeholder here has a lighter text. Then when we start typing, it becomes the dark text that we have in our example, right? So what we have to do here is to change the placeholder text. So let's do that. So input, and then remember what we want is the WebKit input placeholder pseudo element. So WebKit input placeholder, meaning that this only works in WebKit right now, which are the Chrome and Safari browsers. So we want a font weight of 100 only and a color of a light gray 4. Okay, and now just remember that we put the font size here to inherit. And so it inherits the global font size, which is 10 pixels, remember, so 1 rem. But that's quite small actually. And so let's set a default font size here on the header. Okay, so let's go to the header and set a font size here. And then it will inherit the font size from this parent component. So let's set it to 14 pixels here, so 1.4 rem. And then check it out again. And yeah, that's much better. Now that looks a lot like our original, right? So this one here. So that was some great progress. You used a lot more Flexbox in this lecture to align these smaller elements here in this component and also overall in this header here, right? So Flexbox is perfect for these small kind of situations where you have to do some simple alignments. So instead of messing with margins and translates and floats and text align center and all of that stuff, we just use Flexbox and it's perfect for that. Now next up, we need to fix this user navigation here, of course, but I'm leaving that to the next lecture so that you can take a break right now and then come back to the next lecture once you're ready to go. All right, let's now finish the header in this third part. So we formatted the logo, we formatted the search bar. Now it's time to format the user navigation. And the first thing we have to do is to put these 3 elements, so this one, and this one here, all side by side. And so what's better than using Flexbox for that, right? So down here we have the user navigation. And so we're going to set display to flex to turn this into a flex container. And so once again, we have the situation that we had with the search bar before, where a flex item is also at the same time a flex container. And that is completely normal. It's no problem to do that. And it's actually pretty common, as you will see throughout the rest of the project. We're going to do that all the time. So display flex, and this is what it looks like. Now the next step is to vertically center these elements here, right? So along the cross axis. And so we use align items. Set to center. And so that's what we get, and that's much better. So what can we do next? Well, let's take a look at this here. And so the next thing that I want to do is to apply the spacing here. Oh, what's going on here? Let's reload it. Right. So the next thing that I want to do is to give it this spacing here between these boxes, and then also this gray background color on hover, right? So let's very quickly implement that. So where we want this space to happen is basically on the user nav icon box and this one and the user. Okay, so these 2 classes. Now we could go ahead and group them, so make a selector for icon box and user at the same time, but I'm simply going to do it like this. So the user nav and then all of the direct children. And that will have the exact same effect, right? Because we only select the direct children, which is what that selector here does. So all we do is to select this element, and this one. And that's exactly what I was saying before, right? So first some padding, and we want 0 on the top and 2 on the left and right, so 2 RAM. And we wanted to have a cursor in the form of a pointer. So I don't know if you saw that in the demo. And now let's take care of that background. So we select all of them again, but this time on hover. And what we want to happen is the background color set to our gray light 2 color. So let's copy that from here because it's a lot of code to type out. So this one here. Now this is not going to work as expected, but I'm going to show it to you why. So this is the gray hover for this icon box, and then for the user. So the height of this entire navigation bar here is given by the height of this element here, right? But that's not really what we want. We want this navbar to fill this entire space all the way from the beginning of the header to the end. So how can we actually achieve that? And there's one great Flexbox property for that, which I showed you before, and it's called align self, okay? So this is like align items, but for one individual flex item, right? So align self, and we want this one set to stretch. Okay, so remember that in the header here, we set the align items to center. And that's why the 3 elements, the logo, the search bar, and the user nav, are vertically centered. But in fact, we don't want the navbar to be vertically centered. And so we override the align items here with align self, setting it to stretch, which will then produce this result. Okay, and so that's much better. Now all we have to do to fix the fact that this hovering here is not going all the way from the top to the bottom is to then set the height of all of these elements to 100%. So let's check it out now. And so here we go. Now it's hovering the entire area. Okay, and so that is the power of align self. Now what's happening here, of course, is that this icon and this text is all the way at the top of its parent element. That's completely normal, but we should fix that. It should obviously be centered here vertically, right? And I'm sure that by now you can guess how we're going to do that. So Flexbox to the rescue. So let's go to the icon box, display, flex, and then align items set to center. So once more, remember that align items aligns the flex items along the cross axis, and so usually vertically, and that's exactly what we want. So we want to center it vertically, so we use align items. And so now you see that we are already at the 3rd level of flex containers, right? So that actually works. So the header is a flex container, then the navbar here, all of this element is a flex container, and now the icon box itself is a flex container as well. So we're already at the 3rd level of flex containers. And once more, that's no problem. That is absolutely okay. That is just how Flexbox works, really. And actually, since we're doing this, we should actually do the same thing here with the user, right? So all of this should also be vertically centered. And so instead of putting it here in the icon box where we put it, we can actually put it here so that we do it to all of the direct children. So the 2 icon boxes as well as the user. Okay, and so that is much better. So all of these 3 are now effectively flex containers as well. All right, so let's now take care of these icons here. So changing the color and then formatting the notification here as well. So as for the icon, we already have its height and its width. Now let's also take care of the color of the icon. So once again, let's use the fill property, setting it to a dark gray. So the same one as well. Where is it? Actually, it's not here anywhere. So let's just copy this here and then change it. So color gray dark 2. Okay, so that's this one. So 777. So that's the color. And now let's format the notification here. So it should have a font size of 0.8 rem, so really small, then a height of 1.75 and a width as well of 0.75 rem, so 0.75, and here the same, and then a border radius set to 50%. And actually here it's 1.75, so such as I had it in the beginning. So 1.75 rem. Then the background color should be our primary pink color. So that's our primary color. And then the text in there should be white. And so I'm just going to use FFF here again. And so let's take a look at that. And that looks pretty good already. Now we have to actually position this element here on top of the icon, right? And so the best way of that is this time not using Flexbox. So Flexbox doesn't really give us a way to perfectly position an element exactly where we want it, but instead we're just going to use absolute positioning here, okay? So let's do that. So position absolute, and then remember the parent element should be set to position relative. So position relative here. And now let's say we want it on the top like 0, and from the right like 1 rem, just to experiment with this. And somehow it's gone. I see it's up here now, and I'm not really sure why that is. So I guess maybe it's best to remove this position relative from here and put it here. So maybe it doesn't work that well on an SVG element, which the icon is in fact. And so let's just put it on the icon box. And so yeah, that works much better. Now we just have to move it down a little bit. So top like 1.5 rem. All right, here we go. Now just maybe a bit more to the left side. So increase it here, so 1.1 rem, but that should be perfect already. Now let's just get rid of this background color here. It looks kind of silly by now. And yeah, so that's great. Now all we have to do is to like center this text in here, both horizontally and vertically. And so let me tell you another secret, let's say, which is that we can actually use Flexbox for that as well. So Flexbox doesn't only work when we have child elements, but it works with text as well. So display flex, and now we simply have to say justify content center, which centers the content horizontally, and align items also to center, which is gonna center it vertically. So let's take a look at that. And in fact, you see that it works. So in this case, you actually have now 4 levels of Flexbox, one inside of another. Now what you see here maybe is that this is not really a circle here. And I think that's because this text here is larger than this one. You see, this one is like a perfect circle, but this one is not. So I think we shouldn't use a border radius 50% here, but instead just like a very high number. So just as we did before here on this part. And actually it looks the exact same way, but never mind. This is really not a problem, all right? Now all we have to do is give it some space here on this user photo, and then I think we are good to go. So the user photo, margin left, and let's say 1 rem. And actually we don't really need to format this user here, because we already did it up here with this selector, where we selected all of the elements at once. And the username also doesn't really need to be selected, because there's no style applying to it. Okay, let's actually set this here back to 50%, because that's a cleaner solution. And so with that, I think that this is ready. Well, something here is not right. And yeah, of course it's not margin left, it's margin right. Okay, now this here looks like it has a lot more space here on this side than it has here. So it's not really symmetric. So let's change that one very quickly. So to 2 rem. And okay. So our hover here is also working. Let's compare it with this one here. And you see it actually is exactly the same. And so it's perfect. All right, so I hope that these first couple of lectures were really helpful for you to start grasping the concepts that are behind Flexbox and the different properties that we can use to align different elements in different situations like the ones that I showed you up until this point. Now there's a lot more content to come and a lot more Flexbox to use, So stay tuned for all of these lectures that are to follow. See you next time.